It is with great somberness that I have to be the one to tell you guys that single player games are dead. They're dying. It's looking bad out there. RIP single player games. At least that's what Kotaku wants you to believe. I personally disagree, and I think the facts are on my side. But let's go through this article together. It's been such a long time since I've seen you guys. How are you doing? Happy Valentine's Day for those of you who celebrate. And for those of you who don't celebrate, love is overrated. All you need is yourself. Go to the gym, work out, conquer the world. Also, if you might notice some yellowness happening here, it's fine. I just want to let you guys know which buttons are interactable here. Without further ado, let's get into this video. All right, so this is from Kenneth Shepard. Immortals of Aveum proves it's a grim time for single player games. Oh boy. We're not gonna read the whole article. You guys can do it for yourselves, but I'll just give you little slivers. So, at a high level, Immortals was massively overscoped for a studio debut project, a former Cine Studios employee told IGN. The development cost was around $85 million, and I think EA kicked in $40 million for the marketing distribution. Sure, there was some serious talent on the development team, but trying to make a AAA single-player shooter in today's market was truly an awful idea, especially since it was a new IP that was also trying to leverage Unreal Engine 5. What ended up launching was a bloated, repetitive campaign that was far too long. Right, so right then and there, that kind of seems to be the issue here, not the fact that this market is not good for single player games or first person shooters. We know that to be false, but they were overly budgeted. They were bloated, it was repetitive, and it was far too long. But let's continue. Let's see if there's anything that gives some more insight as to why this game didn't do that well. On paper, single player games like Immortals of Aveum sound ideal for those who aren't looking for another life-sucking live service game, but without better sales or in-game purchase to bring in money, it seems like the single player model is only sustainable on games with smaller budgets. Overscope is how Immortals of Aveum ends up with a bloated, repetitive campaign, but swaths of video game industry apparently haven't figured this out yet. Those realities are especially true for new, unproven properties like this one. It's not a sequel or a remake. It doesn't require 400 hours to beat, has zero microtransactions, no pointless open world grinding, a current Ascend employee to IGN. Although not everyone loved it, it reviewed pretty well, sitting at a 74 on OpenCritic and mostly positive on Steam. No one bought it. Okay, so here's the thing. The reason why no one bought this game is because this game released in between Baldur's Gate and Starfield. Say what you want about Starfield, but Starfield was hyped up beyond belief. That's why a lot of people were disappointed with it. Starfield, also a first-person shooter game, RPG, with no microtransaction or live service aspects or anything of the sort, sold pretty well. Baldur's Gate 3, granted, not first-person, but a single player in this economy, it won Game of the Year. It sold like gangbusters. The issue here is that you had an unproven, untested IP going against two juggernauts and not differentiating yourself enough. I will agree with one point. We have a ton of first-person games. We have a ton of them. Most games that come, I feel like, are first-person shooters, are first-person perspective. You have to differentiate yourself enough. And if your thing was magical first-person shooter, that's not going to cut it for a lot of people. And again, a lot of people didn't even know when this game came out. They should have advertised it at better times, and they should have moved the release date, because you end up getting Horizoned. You can't blame gamers for not playing the game when you didn't give them a real reason to play it. I'm sorry. And also, to talk about live services, I famously do not like live service games. I feel like a lot of them are done poorly. Not saying they can't be done correctly, but a lot done poorly. But if you look at Helldivers 2, it has microtransactions, all these things. It's really being reviewed highly and being played a lot. It broke records. I think it had 200,000 people concurrently on Steam and 100,000 on PlayStation. It was a record for Sony because they advertised the game well. They made it look fun, and it's a good game. It's not overly repetitive. It's not bloated. It's not any of those things. So those things to consider. But here is a section I agree with. Even if Immortals of Aveum isn't a huge open world game, it's still its budget still seems to be aspiring for something larger in scope than the game could reach. Perhaps not every game needs to be aspiring to cutting edge visual fidelity, and by saving money on graphics, can make back its budget without relying on multiplayer and live service elements. Shorter, more streamlined experiences can made a profit much more easily 20 years ago, but by budget increases without feasible return, the entire business model is collapsing under the weight. Despite microtransactions and live service structures, dozens of games still die if they can't get a foothold in players' everyday lives. Yes, 100% agree. Games nowadays are trying to compete with like social media in the sense that they want to occupy all of your time, all of the time, and take all of your money. And in doing so, they sacrifice things like gameplay, replayability, enjoyment in terms of stretching out, or in order to stretch out how many times you're going to play this game, how much money you're going to sink into it. They want all of the money all the time. But this isn't to say there aren't games out there who do provide fantastic single player experiences. If you look at the AAA space, people may be controversial with this, but like Naughty Dog does very well in AAA single player space. Insomniac with Spider-Man series, single player games. God of War, single player game. Starfield, not everyone's favorite, but still a single player game. There's Baldur's Gate. There are a ton of single player games out there. Even if you're going to go to AA, you have basically anything from Focus Entertainment, like a Plague Tale series. Great games, shorter, more streamlined single player games. The notion, though, that single player games are dying is idiotic. This is clickbait at its best. Shame on you, Kotaku. Single player games aren't dying. In fact, with games like Jedi Survivor, Resident Evil 4, most of the games that are nominated for Game of the Year are single player games. Zelda, Baldur's Gate. Well, Baldur's Gate can be multiplayer too, but mostly single player. Baldur's Gate, Resident Evil 4, God of War, Elden Ring. All these games are single player experiences. Some might have light multiplayer experiences, but they're nothing like these games as a service. Nothing like those kinds of games. Nothing like Call of Duty. And yet, those are consistently considered some of the best games that come out each year. Each year. The real issue for this particular game, and I think for other games too, is overscope. Is they try to be the big, huge juggernauts, and it's almost like how like DC tried to become Marvel overnight instead of like slowly building up and building out. They want to do everything at once because they're looking at things in terms of return on investment and not anything else. If they put 100 million in, they expect to get $1 billion out, and that's not feasible. And that is indicative of the current AAA structure. But again, this specific game, it is not indicative of the single player market at whole, not even by a long shot. It's indicative of the AAA's mentality of bigger is always better. Also, really quickly, I was going to do like a whole video on this, but I'm kind of pressed for time. I do think it's strange we always have this conversation about the yellow paint, the white paint and stuff. We don't want to be our hands being held. I need you guys to understand one aspect of it. It's not for people who are extreme pro gamers or are playing video games for a long time. That stuff is mostly for people who aren't familiar with the language of video games, for game literacy. Most of us are literate, so we know, hey, this means this, you can go here, this texture is slightly different from other texture, so you can probably interact with that. We make those inferences based off of our past experiences. But for people who are new to video games, or new to that game, that's their first time playing any sort of game like that, they're going to need some hand holders, they're going to need some visual markers. And ultimately, it doesn't take away from it. I kind of hate everyone falling back on the whole. It breaks immersion. So does pausing a game. So does a cutscene that comes out of nowhere. So does moments where your character is no longer in your control. Like, a lot of things can break immersion, but it's what you're willing, I guess, to put up with personally. And for me, having different colored things are made more obvious. People who may have disabilities or just not be very good at figuring things out for themselves is not an issue. It doesn't take away anything from me. So now I know I can climb this and touch this. Okay, that doesn't like solve the game for me or anything. So I just thought that was a weird thing people are arguing about on the internet. But it's the internet.